Okay then, so this morning we're going to talk about React State, and sometimes this can be a confusing concept for people to begin with. So I'm going to try and break it down as simply as possible, but if what I say doesn't make sense, just please stop me and we'll try and break it down a bit further. So essentially we use state in our applications when we expect anything to change. So state is just a store of a value that we expect to change, and we're going to need to update the display to show the updated page and show something that has changed. So the most basic example you'll find with state is just keeping a count of something. So this might be if you're playing an online game, maybe you're playing Tetris online, it's keeping your score or something like that, then that score would be stored in the state. And then that means as soon as you score points, it can refresh the page and update the state of the page, which will update your score. Now, state is not unique to React, of course. You know, we don't have to build with React to use state. State is fundamental to many applications. So we're looking at state in the context of React, but don't think that state is a React thing. Just like props isn't a React thing, that's just what they're called in React. And props is just an object, right, that stores values that we can pass around between our application. And state is just another store of values that we put in its own container, you know, so that humans understand what it's doing. We expect it to change in the application, and we have to update something when that value does change. Yeah, so we're just going to build this little counter to begin with. Essentially, when I click the increase count button, it goes up, and when I click the decrease button, it goes down. Yeah, simple as that. So every time that button is clicked, the state is updated, the count value in the state is updated, and the page is forced to refresh. Any questions so far, or is that common sense, right? Yeah? Nice. Okay, let's jump into React and see how we would create such a thing. So we'll look at a login example afterwards, but for now I just want to look at the count example. So this structure should be familiar to us. Just make my terminal a bit smaller. So all I'm doing at the moment is I'm just importing one component called count and rendering it within the app component to render it to the page. So nothing special there. So I've built it using hooks because I think that's far simpler to manage state using hooks now. And ever since React 16.8, which was released in February of this year, 2019, then we can use hooks to bring state into functional components. Previously, we had to use class-based components to use state. And one more thing about state I should probably mention is that it is scoped local to the file. So if we're going to create a count workshop component here, and we create some state inside of it, then the state is only available in that file, unless we do other things, you know, using our imports and our exports, and we send things down or pass as props. But whatever variable is stored in state here is not automatically available in any other file. Yeah, so there's a nice partition between our states for our different components. All right. So I want to have a go at recreating the counter first. So I'm not going to reveal the code for it. I want to just build it up with you. So instead of importing from the count file or the count hooks file, we're just going to import from the counts workshop. And hopefully it will look the same. All right, we are building a React component. So where do we start? Import React from React. Yep. Except we need a capital R, right? for the first React, because that's how it's named. In fact, it's a default import, so we can call it whatever we want, but it makes sense to give it a capital. And because we're using state in a functional component, we need to use a hook and import that hook, and the hook is called UseState. So we can just write that like that. Whoops. Sorry, my space bar. I hit V instead. Okay. So now I want to create a functional component, which is just like any other JavaScript function. However, I need to capitalize it because it's a component as opposed to just a plain function. And that function is going to return something, right? So that's the setup you should have for most components. Yeah, as it's a workshop on state, let's create the state first. Now, there's a standardized syntax for this. And we create a variable, or in fact, we're going to create two variables, and we're going to use array destructuring to name both of those variables. So if you haven't seen this before, it looks something like this. We put both of our variable names inside of an array. I'm going to call the first one count, because that's what we want to store in the state. So this first variable is whatever we want to store in the state. And the second variable stores the method to change the state. And the convention is to prepend it with set, and then use the variable name that you're actually setting. So set count would make sense in this case. So just to recap, the first one was the variable, the state variable, the name of the state variable. And this second one was the method to change the value of that state variable. We set that equal to the UseState hook. A hook is just another function, so we invoke that. And it just takes one argument, and that argument is the default value of the state variable. So in this case, the default value of count. What value does it make sense to initialize a count to? 0? Yeah. 0 or 1? Yeah, but we'll go for 0 in this case. So why can we write it like this? Well, the UseState method returns an array. It returns an array of two things, or at least two things, but let's say two things in this case. The first thing it returns is the value of count, or just setting up the variable for count, and the second thing it returns is a method. Yeah, so this returns an array, and we're destructuring that array and setting it into two variables, setting its parts into two variables. That's probably the most confusing bit about using hooks with state. The rest is greatly simplified, as opposed to a class-based component. Any questions on that bit before we move on? Yep, Jonathan?
So we use the const then creates two arrays?
No. This is the same as doing const count equals UseState invoked index 0, and then also const set count equals UseState index 1. So UseState returns an array. The first element in the array is the state variable. The second element in the array is the set count method. So rather than writing two lines, it's just done all in one go. And you can use that for any array. So if you had an array that always had 4 items inside, name, age, gender, one other thing, birthday, then you could do const name, age, gender, birthday equals the name of your array. Yeah, and that would destructure it into various variables. Does that make sense what that first line's doing? Yeah. The only reason I write it like that, yeah, 1 second, sorry. The only reason I write it like that is just because you will always see it written like that in the documentation, everywhere else. It's just the way it's done. Yeah?
Yeah,
Yep, go ahead.
Just answer the question I was going to ask, which is, are these like standardized names or are these just things that you're personally using?
So, a bit of both, right? So count, I'm using the name count because we want to increase a count. The only bit that's standardized is the set. So with class-based components, it used to be called SetState. That was the method you used to change the state. So that convention is carried over now. If I had a variable called age, I would have const age, comma, set age. Yeah, so the convention just comes from the set bit. You can call it whatever you want, but let's try and stick to the convention as much as possible. Yep, go ahead. Yeah.
Why is it that UseState is in a kind of destructured curly bracket, whereas when I'm talking about the first line here,
Oh, yep.
importing,
Yep.
why is React as it is, and then UseState is like a destructured method?
Does anyone know the answer to that yet, or not? Okay, all right. So maybe Ricardo hasn't mentioned that. Usually he talks about modules and imports and exports and stuff, but we haven't had a specific workshop on it yet. So if you look at that, we've got an export default there. So if you looked at the React source code, you would find an export default React in there, which means when you import it, you can effectively name it anything you want because it's a default export. However, React is a reasonably large file. It's got a lot of things in it. It doesn't just export React. It exports lots of other different individual modules as well, or individual functions as well. So further on down in your React page, you might have something like export, and then you might have a list of things. One of them would be UseState. Oops. What else we got? We've probably got component in there. Other hooks, use effects. Lots of things will be exported, right, as non-default exports. Because they're not a default export, you need to name them exactly when importing them. And any named imports must go inside of these curly braces. So that means in the React source code, there is a normal export, a non-default export called UseState. We need to put it in curly braces and use its actual name to make it accessible in this file. It's not imported by default. Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be able to use this.
Where's that file? Is that file?
This, here it is. So I clicked control just left click, and it takes me to index.d.typescript, yeah? And this is some source code for React. And then if I search for UseState, here it is. Here's the UseState function. And that would be the source code for the hook. Probably doesn't make much sense to you at the moment, right? That's okay. And then somewhere we've probably got an export, unless it's configured somewhere else, which it could be. Yeah, so it's probably configured somewhere else. But essentially you can see that lots of these functions are defined within the source code, and they're being exported from that file, and the only way that we can access them is by using named imports like that. So that syntax is standard JavaScript. It's nothing to do with React. That's ES6 module syntax. So if you need to know a bit more about it, you can look up ES6 modules, import export syntax, and that should tell you the differences between the named imports, which is that, and the default imports, which is that. Does that sort of answer the question? Yeah. All right. Back to state then, yeah? Okay. So we've set a variable, we've initialized it to 0, and we've created a method to change our count. Change our count variable, which is a state-based variable. So let's just set up a little tiny bit of UI. So very similar to what I had before. Let's see whether my page is still there. Yeah. So that's essentially what we want to recreate, yeah? Unless you want to be extra creative, you can tell me how to create it differently. But let's just make sure that we can display the count, and we've got a button to increase and decrease, yeah? So, where would you start me off?
We have to add some HTML tag.
Definitely, let's create some JSX. So what tags do you want? A div? Generic div? Why not? What goes in my div?
Counts.
Yeah, something that displays the count. Or we can say the count is, this time, just be a little bit different. And then we want to say what the count actually is, yeah? This is a bit of JavaScript, so it goes in the curly braces. And what name do I give it?
Count.
Count, exactly, yeah. The count is count, yeah? But this time count is referenced in the variable stored in state. This will just be outputted as text. And this will first pass the JavaScript and then output it as text as well. Okay, let's, at this stage, not take the file that I created earlier, but let's do the one that we're creating now. So I think I called it count workshop. That should hopefully recompile. It doesn't contain a default export. Yeah, let's just make sure we do that first then. Oh, that's just giving you the answer. Nice. So remember, if we want to import it in another file, then let's just use an export default again, because we've only got one here. And that will allow us to import count from count workshop. Good. I've got a warning. Set count is assigned a value but never used yet. We haven't got there yet, so that's fine. But let's see if we've actually got something displaying. Yeah, we've got very, very small. Yeah, the count is 0. Okay, good. So it's taken our 0 already. So we know it's correctly referencing that state variable, which is a great start. Next, let's enable us to change the count. Yeah, let's create a couple of buttons. And what would you like our buttons to say? Increment, yeah. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Increment and decrement. Yeah. All right. What do we make our button do, or how do we make our button actually do something, trigger something? Yeah, we've got to give it some properties, and specifically some sort of event listener. And we can do that inline in React. And onClick's been suggested, so let's go with that for now. So onClick I write as camel case, because we're in JSX. It would be all lowercase if you're in HTML. So onClick, and then that equals a bit of JavaScript code that we're going to run. And then the same for the other button. Alright, what specifically do we want that onClick to do then?
Trigger a function.
Trigger a function. What function? Set count function that we've already created and we've got accessible for us, yeah. Yes, we've already created the method that we want to trigger that changes the state. So we just have to invoke it. We're going to have to invoke it as a callback, but I'll just write this bit first. And then how do we increment the count? Sorry, I should probably explain this. So what it does is whatever value you pass into it, it updates the value of the count variable with the value that we pass in, right? So if I put 9 in there, it would change the number to 9 straight away. Change the count to 9 straight away. So what do we want to do? We want to increment it by 1, so we could instead do... Yeah, exactly, right? Count plus 1. And following the same pattern then, we could do count minus 1 for our decrement. That won't quite work as it is. What are we getting a complaint about now? Button click. Oh yeah, so we've got that as well. Passing error, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped. How do I fix that first? Could do an array, yeah. What's probably the preferred method or the most concise?
Fragment that.
Fragment, yeah. So I'm going to do an empty fragment. And that will fix that error. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Yeah, too many re-renders. So what's happening here is that this is just getting invoked straight away rather than being passed as a callback function to the onClick. For some reason, the way it's done in React, it's just updating the state all the time. Yeah. So the way we get around that is we send our set count as a callback. Yeah. So this will now only get invoked when we click. If we flick back now, we should have something that looks a lot better. Apologies for the buttons being very big. I could change that in the CSS, but it's just left over from my previous one. Whereas obviously I didn't use a div before, I must have used a different one, so this one's not styled up the top. Okay, let's see if they work. Increment, looks good. Decrement, also looks good. So at its most basic, you've just set up state using React hooks, which is a technology less than a year old. So yeah, nice. Nice and modern. Very, very simple, very, very clean. Yeah. How about if, this is the only sort of drawback to me, if I wanted to set more than one thing in the state, how would I do it? I want to set more than one state variable. Use different naming, but yeah, essentially we have to create a whole nother one of those, yeah? I don't know, let's say number of times pressed or something like that, right? Number of, hold on, pressed, how do I say that? So not count, but clicks? Clicks, is that alright? Clicks and set clicks. Make sure it doesn't have to be, but just let's follow convention, camel case. And that can be 0 as well to begin with. So now, probably as opposed to doing it all in line like this, it's going to get a bit messy, right? If I start sort of doing that, I could do that, but how about we just create a generic method now for update states. It's not great, right? But hopefully it will serve the purpose of just seeing what we've got to do to get more than one state updated. Okay, and we just want to invoke that, essentially. We're not sending any arguments in there. What's happening with that one? Cool. So now where would I put this update states method? Under the state. Yes, we could put it outside, but then if we put it outside, it's not going to have access to count and clicks by default. So let's keep it, huh?
Oh, sorry, yeah, no. Underneath the way you've defined those two variables?
Yeah, that's where it's got to go, because if we put it underneath, as in underneath there, completely outside of the function, then it won't have access to count and clicks by default, and we'd have to pass them in there, which is a bit messier, and it doesn't need to be done that way. So let's just create another function inside of our count function. Yeah, look, we could probably even follow that syntax. So we could say const update states equals an arrow function. What does that arrow function do? Well, it invokes set count, and we need a ternary here though, wouldn't we? So we'd need like an add and a decrease. Probably I should call them increment and decrement as they're the same, but whatever. I'm going to leave it like that. So this is going to be just call it operation. So what do we actually need to do? Do we need to add or decrease? And let's do a ternary. Operation. Operations add. Then we can set count and still do count plus 1. Otherwise, we can decrement it, yeah? Okay, so that's one thing we want it to do. We want it to set the count. The other thing we want it to do is to set the clicks. And to set the clicks, we can just always do clicks plus 1. Yeah, because that just always goes up, whether we increment or decrement. That was my idea of the click, yeah? Just to show a different thing stored in state. So we've got the count is, and then we might as well have similar, but the number of clicks is clicks. So that should now perform the set count and the set clicks every time we click a button. That's the theory anyway, if I've written it correctly. Does anyone want to spot any or point out any glaring errors before I experiment?
Do you need to put a return before the ternary?
Do I need to put a return before the ternary? We're not returning anything from that function, are we? We're just invoking a method. So return would actually output something from the function.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I just want to update the state. So a return is not necessary. Okay, let's have a quick look then. Increment, they're both 1. It's going in sync. Now if I decrement, nice. Yeah? So that would be a way of using multiple values in state using React hooks. Okay. Any questions? Do you want to have a go at writing one more, like for a login or something, or is that enough for the state? And then I can just show you how to do it with a class-based component as well, which you also need to know because of legacy code. So if you've got lots of functions that are already written using class-based components, you will need to know how to update the state in them. And also for one of the topics on the platform, the state topic still only uses class-based components to update the state because of the way the testing syntax works. So if you want to use React hooks to test your state skills, then you're going to have to use the React hooks training. I'll show you this in a second if I said a lot of what I said just didn't make sense. So should we just look at the class-based way of updating state? Yeah? Should we just rewrite this one? Are you happy to do that? Or should we go back to the original count example? That has already done it for it. So count hooks. So we could change this one into class-based. I think that's the simplest place to start. Of course.
But maybe this is something that we might discuss afterwards. How do we pass these states as props?
How do you pass the state as props?
Is it just the standard way that we pass a prop?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're distinct things, but they can be used together. So there's no special way to pass a state value as a prop.
Okay.
It's just the same as before.
Because if you, is there a situation where maybe if something's being passed into different components as a state, maybe would you have different components that can alter the same state? Or is this maybe I'm not really thinking of a solid example?
Would you have different components that could alter the same value in state? Absolutely, yeah. But the problem with that is obviously the state has to be stored in one component itself. So you try and store it as far up the chain as possible, and then Yeah, we haven't looked at data passing in React. We'll get to that. But so let's say we stored it in app.js. Then if two child components wanted access to that value, you're going to pass it down to both of them via props, and then they have access to it. They can also update that value in the parent component by throwing a callback back up to the app.js component, which we haven't seen yet. But yeah, there are ways to do it, but it's not the easiest thing the first time you look at it. So let's just look at localized state for now. But yeah, of course, in bigger scale applications, you're going to need to share state across the board. Yeah, and this is where some people use things like Redux. Have you heard of Redux? It's a state management tool. You've used it?
I
Tried to, yeah. It's a whole different syntax and way of designing.
I tried to understand it. It's not confusing.
Yeah, so I don't want to go there at the moment, but that's one solution for larger applications, or you've got things like the context API or just callbacks from child to parent as well. So there's lots of different ways we can do it, but for now let's just keep it into one component. Yep.
Yeah, update states, it's a function or it's
So update states is a function. Yeah, here it is, and we've defined it equal to an arrow function.
function update states.
No. So it's because of the way I've written it, so maybe that was confusing for you. So I've just assigned it into a variable and then done an arrow function. And that's a totally valid way to write a function. Or I could have done function update states, operation, like that. Same thing. Yeah.
Did you define a function with a let, or would it always be
No.
const?
No. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I thought you meant do that, and you definitely can't do that. But you're saying if I wrote it the other way.
Yeah, like how you had it before, but instead of const, it's let.
Yeah.
Can you use that as a function?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. Your choice, but React tends to prefer pure functions if possible. And pure functions should be whatever the input is, the output is always the same. So based on that, you can safely declare it as a const, I think. Yeah, the function declaration itself doesn't change, and it produces the same output. So I prefer to use const for them. Okay. So let's, after having seen definitely the simpler way, I think, let's have a look at CLI is not defined in count workshop. Where's that coming from first? Ah, I started to right clicks and then stopped, obviously. All right, let's look at a class-based version of our count component. Firstly, how would I change a function to a class? Does anyone know?
Class.
Okay, yeah, we definitely got to change the function to class. Expands or extends?
Extends.
Yeah, I quite like it. Expands though, it sounds good. Extends. Let's just put React.component so I don't have to import it again. So we could have also done React.UseState down here, but I wanted to import it itself. What else we got? So all of this is now nonsense because that can only exist within a function-based component. It's a hook, so we cannot use it in a class-based component. Bye-bye. We'll leave the method there for now. Oh, we weren't going to change this one, were we? We were going to change the hooks example because it was a bit simpler. Alright, so just to recap, we got rid of UseState because it doesn't make sense in a class-based component. We changed function to class. We got rid of the parentheses. I'll rename it count so we know what it is. And that was it so far, right? Every class-based component, if we want to display something on the page, needs what?
Constructor.
It definitely needs a constructor. Alright, we'll start there. We'll start from top down. So constructor. Inside the constructor goes... Yep, let's invoke super. Why do we do that? Well, we do that so we have access to React.component. Yeah, so super invokes the parent class. The parent class in this case is React.component. So we're getting various things from React.component, such as the SetState method, which we're going to use in a second. Okay, as we are dealing with state in React, we declare our initial values of state in the constructor of our class. This.state equals, and we pass in an object. The object, well, we give it the same name as before. Before we used count, so I'm also going to use count here. And then we give it an initial value as the value of our count key. So let's put 0 again. Yeah, let's just keep everything the same. So hopefully you can see the one-to-one or the changes we had to make. All right. That's good for the constructor. What comes next? The what, sorry?
And you have to add clicks.
I'm not going to do clicks now. I'm going to keep the example as simple as possible. So I'm just going to use the count one only for now.
So render.
Yep, so every class base component, if we want it to render something or display something on the screen, we need to invoke the render method as well. Inside of there goes our return statement. Okay. How about count? Can I just reference it as count now? Yeah, to access this variable here, I need to put this dot state dot count. And I would need to do the same here. All right. Okay. We haven't finished yet. What else do we need to do? Yeah, so we can either add the method in line, and it's not going to be called setCount. It's going to be called SetState. So class-based component, to update any state, no matter the name of the variable, you use the SetState method. So it must be SetState. SetState itself takes an object. As the key, or keys, you put the value that you want to change. And as the value, the new value, right? What's it complaining about? I haven't closed my object. And we can do the same down here for the decrement. I'm missing a bracket, I think, aren't I? Alright. Anything else? I think we're pretty much there. We've got some problems. Oh, that's in the other one here, because we started writing it and then stopped, so I'll just get rid of that for now. So yeah, we had to obviously extend React component, have a constructor to store the initial values of state. When we reference our values in state, we have to always use this dot state dot something. And then we call the SetState method and pass in an object to update the state this time. See if it's working. Nope. Element type is invalid, expected string for built-in components or a class function concept. You got object. You likely forgot to export your component. Well, it's given us a good clue. Did I? Export default. Looks like I've exported, but did I import it correctly? No, so we're doing count hooks this time, which is a stupid name, so let's rename the file. Let's say count class. back in app.js. Ah, it's updated it for me. Nice. SetState is not defined. SetState. It's called SetState, isn't it? SetState.
This dot SetState, no?
Yeah. This dot SetState. Thank you very much, because we're in a class again. So this dot SetState and this dot SetState. See how it's a bit of a pain, and you can make more mistakes, I think, with class-based methods.
So many factors.
There's so many things to remember. Yeah. And now it looks good. Does it work? Seems to. Okay, nice. But let's see if I can get a side-by-side view, and we'll see what we prefer. So I think you probably already know the answer, but well, I think I know the answer already. Oh, that's with clicks anyway, but it's still probably going to be shorter.
But you haven't put the update state separation in
I haven't put what, sorry?
clicks.
I haven't even put the clicks in yet, no. But it's probably still going to be... Let's get rid of a few of these. Count workshop. Nope, not that one. Where's it gone? Count class, there we are. So if we change this back to how it was, let's get rid of the clicks. So I don't need any of that. And this will be set count. Count plus 1. And this will be the same, but minus 1. Yep, so those two are equivalent. What do you prefer? Yeah, I mean that says it all to me, really. And you've been working with functions from day one, right, on this course. Classes, you've worked with them a bit, definitely, in React, obviously, and the way that the videos are done are still using class-based components, so you've definitely got some familiarity with them, but hopefully you can see that using function-based components does simplify things somewhat. It's good to know both ways, but if you get the chance to write new software, then I would recommend trying to use only function-based components and use the necessary hooks. And certainly in the workshops, that's what I'll be trying to teach as we go forward. Yeah, always use the hook version of things, and you've got the videos to fall back on if you want to learn the other way of doing things as well. Yeah? Cool. I think there's some very, very rare situations still at the moment, because they haven't quite released a hook to carry to cover. They haven't released a built-in hook to cover every single use case of lifecycle methods and class-based methods. But you can write your own custom hooks as well, so they're actually far, far, far more powerful. Previously with classes, you were locked in essentially to use only what the class-based component gave you access to, whereas now you can write a custom hook to do anything. Yeah, it's just a function. You make it do anything you want. Yeah. But I very much doubt you'll come across those use cases before they release some inbuilt hooks to cover everything. Yeah, and there's already ways around it. But all the common ones, no, they've got equivalents, or you've got a hook that maybe covers 10 different lifecycle methods or something like that. Yeah. So we'll look at UseEffect, will probably be the next hook that we look at, and that can mimic the behavior of component did mount, if you've come across that one yet, and other lifecycle methods it can mimic there. but is more powerful as well. Yeah.
Graham,
Yeah. Hey, Max.
quick question. With the state using the constructor method, or rather using the class method, I can understand how you can use an object. You can have an object with lots of counters. You can have count, age, lots of different, fields in the object. But how would that work in the function version?
Yeah, so as I said, that's the only drawback for me at the moment, is that we're going to have quite a few different declarations down here to manage multiple values in the state. But if you're getting too many values in the state for just one component, your component's probably getting too big anyway, or too complicated anyway. So it's a good point to refactor. Yeah, but I agree, it's not ideal. I prefer doing this to store it in an object and be able to manipulate multiple values of state at the same time, as opposed to having their separate declarations. But that's just the way the pattern is at the moment. So that might improve in future versions of React, because it's a common question that people raise, or a common drawback perhaps that people raise. Oh, got rid of it completely. Anything else? I didn't really want to go on too much longer. We can just do maybe one question in the platform if you wanted. Did someone else have a question? No? Just one question in the platform? Because I just wanted to explain when you have to use the class-based method and when you have to use the function-based method on the platform. Do you want me to wait, Zara? Are you okay? Can I carry on? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, of course. Right then. So I think I'm in training. So if we go React, we go intermediate. So there's this one using state. Now this one, I believe you're going to have to use only class-based methods to answer the questions. Whereas the hooks one, and pretty much all the others, but I'll show you when there's a slight difference, but pretty much all the others you might be able to use the hooks as well. You can use the hooks as well. However, I'll show you what makes the test not work with hooks. So if you ever see this .state then invoked, that's going to mean you need to use a class-based state method, unfortunately, at the moment, until we update the tests. Yes, if you see that, we need a class-based component. The bit I've highlighted here, .state, yeah? If it doesn't directly test the state object of the wrapper or of the component, then you can use a hook. But unfortunately, this is directly looking for that this .state object, yeah, in a class-based component. So bearing that in mind, let's answer this one quickly, and then we'll have a look at a hook-based one afterwards. So remember, we needed a constructor. Feel free to help me, guys. Let's invoke super, nice. To get access to the component and the UseState method. Yeah, let's set this .state. So we expect there to be something inside of the state object called message, and we expect that to equal hello state. That's what that is saying, yeah? This is the state object. Set it equal to message with hello state, exclamation mark. And then render. Just checking we didn't need anything else. Yeah, return. What do we want to return? Well, in fact, I probably don't even need to put it in brackets because it's going to be very small. We just want to return some text. So it doesn't matter what I put it in. So we could just put it in a div. Or a p tag if you're lazy, I guess. And We could type hello state because I think there's only one test, but we shouldn't do that. Is there only one test or is there multiple tests? Yeah, so I think that would pass. Yeah, so that would pass, but please don't do that. We need to write a second test, I think, for that one. So what you should do is access the message from the state. So, yeah, so without the brace, if I just did that, this .state.message, well, that's because it's going to type this .state.message on the screen. So make sure you do put it in your curly braces so it evaluates it as a bit of JavaScript, yeah? Now if we do that, we get the confetti, no elegance, all good. Yeah, so that's the most basic state question, and I think all of those directly test the state object. So that will mean you need class-based components for all of them. You see here, wrapper.state, class-based, wrapper.state, class-based, wrapper.state, class-based, and wrapper.state, class-based. Yep, so you're going to need class-based components for all of the intermediate state training. However, if we have a look at many of the other questions, but let's look at hooks specifically, and I imagine that will need some state. But all these other ones, unless they say that .state object, then you're going to be able to use hooks as well. Let's play this one. Create a feature toggle system. Okay. Is stateless components. That, in other words, means it can have state, but it's a functional component. Name equals wrapper.find label. So let's do this bit first. So if it says wrapper.find label, what we're going to need to return. We're going to need a label in there somewhere, right? Yeah, that's all it means, guys. And a button. And we need a button. Okay, is stateless component. So we're using a function here. Name.text to equal feature disabled. And then feature enabled. So maybe enabled, disabled, enabled. Yeah, so it's got to toggle, hasn't it? It's got to toggle between the two things. We're not just changing it. If we changed it once, we wouldn't really need to store anything in the state. But we need to toggle it. So we could store something in the state called feature. Does that work for you? Or feature on? Feature on, it's not great, but I'm just going to call it is feature. Doesn't really make sense, does it? Let's leave it as feature and then set feature. Right, and we do that equal to what? Oh, you can't see very well, can you? Sorry. Yes, we use the UseState hook. And our initial value, well, let's go to the first test. It looks like the first test says feature disabled. So what negative value could we set to begin with?
False.
False. That really makes sense to me. Nice. Okay, so we've set whether our feature is on or off in the state. And dependent on whether the feature is on or off, we want our text to change. If it's off, we want to say feature disabled. If it's on, we want to say feature enabled. Okay, where does that text go inside? It goes inside the name component, and the name component is the label. Can you see that? Name equals wrapper.find label. So I'm going to write my logic to display my message here inside my label. I'm going to do a ternary. How could I structure my ternary operator? What am I testing for true or false?
Feature
Feature. Yeah. So feature is my condition. If it's true, I want to say feature enabled. If it's false,
Shouldn't that all be inside a function? Or you know?
why? It's a valid question. I'm just saying why. Sorry if I was a bit strong with the why.
No, yeah. No, I always thought like return root operator goes inside a function. But I guess it's
Doesn't have to. And we can now say feature disabled. Okay, so that will just work out which bit of text it has to return based on the value of feature. If it's false, then feature disabled. If it's true, feature enabled. I probably want to put it on the same line. Okie doke. You can question my elegance if you want. I don't think there's any particular right way to write it. The button, what it looks like, we're given a bit of freedom with the button. It needs an on-click event, you see, button.simulateClick. However, we could call it anything we want, or not even give it a name in this case, but let's just say toggle feature. So my button needs an on-click event. I'm going to set that equal to what? A callback function? Absolutely. The callback function does what? It toggles the feature, yeah. How does it do that? It does what, Max? Sorry?
It negates the existing, but it's not the existing value.
Replace the existing value, yep. So have we got a method already defined that does that for us?
No, but if you can't do it within, when we call it, you just do not feature.
We could definitely do not feature, but where does that not feature go?
Inside the set.
Inside the set feature, yeah? So set feature is going to update our value. If it was false, not feature is going to turn it to true. If it was true, not feature is going to turn it to false. Does that line make sense? Sort of. There's a few.
Yeah, don't join it.
What have we done wrong? So when you click the button, it invokes this function. The function itself invokes the SetFeature method that we've defined up here. What does SetFeature do? Well, it changes the value of feature to whatever we have put inside of these brackets. Yeah? Back to the left side.
Wait, just scroll over this way with your map.
Yeah.
Why does it expect that the stateless component to equal true? Doesn't that mean it would start with true rather than false?
No, so this line here is testing whether you're using a function-based component or a class-based component. Yeah, so it's a bit confusing because it says is stateless, but historically that was the way of testing whether it was a functional component or a class-based component. So prior to February 2019, you couldn't use state inside of a functional component. So this test still exists, yeah?
So that wanted you to use a class-based component.
Yeah. No, it wanted you to use a function-based component because it says stateless. Yeah? So stateless means function. Stateful used to mean class. And the testing syntax hasn't changed yet, so it's a bit out of sync. But hopefully we'll get more descriptive or better descriptive names, more semantic names in the future for our tests. Yeah? Is functional stateless, is functional or is hook-based component or something like that we might have instead, yeah? So if you wrote a class, that test would fail straight away.
But how, so if that was written
It wouldn't previously. So this is new training that we've done specifically for React hooks. The title of the test is hooks. We're on the hooks training, so we're forcing you to use functional components.
Okay.
And the only way to design these questions nicely is to use things like state or use effect. It's forcing you to use hooks as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I realised.
Okay. Will this work? I think it might. I've got some red, which means I've done something wrong. Let's see what's over here. SetFeature.
Maybe feature.
Toggle feature, return.
Column.
Never return. Sorry, were you about to say this? I'll stop shouting.
What have I missed?
This one is
Line 8, semicolon.
yeah, semicolon inside SetFeature.
And 13 as well.
And 13 as well. Yeah, I don't think that's the issue, right? It's giving me this red for some reason. Let's
Return inside the label.
So we have to grab this by some.
Ah, you mean return in there? Oh, run.
Again, he's right. You need the
Grab.
what's it called? The fraction.
Maybe
That's more like it. Yeah. We need a fragment because we've got two adjacent divs.
That's what you meant also.
this one.
That's better. Now my red's gone. Oh yeah, and you can't have it inside of the return. Yeah, the separate semicolon. So that was right. Let's try it now. Did I go too soon? No, nice.
Oh, wait, how come that doesn't need a return?
It has a return.
Oh, right, yeah, of course.
The whole thing's being returned.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right, sorry. Yeah.
And that's just evaluating whether to put that text or that text. Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't need to return it in there as well. Yeah, good. So that's a couple of examples there to get you started with both class-based stateful components and function-based state components, yeah, or functions using hooks.
Are we going to be doing stuff on the coding challenge this afternoon?
It could come up because I've put beginner and intermediate on for this afternoon. So there's a chance that it could come up on the intermediate questions. Yeah. All right. I think we'll wrap it up there. Any questions? I hope that's been useful, and I hope that will enable you to do at least task 12 now. Is it 12, 13? I forget. But yeah, give it a go and let me know if you have any problems. Thanks, guys.